and you've mentioned some of your videos that it is not a sin to be gay or
No.
right.
Yeah.
And so, and again, I haven't read my Bible in a while, so forgive me.
That's fine. That's
But
fine.
I do remember passages that talked about that.
Hmm.
So clarify that
Yeah,
for me
absolutely.
and for the
Um,
listeners.
yeah. So there's a handful of verses. There's like six, basically, six Bible
Yeah.
verses. Um, you could add a couple here or there. Um, but the big ones are like the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, for example.
Mhm.
Story of
Mhm.
Sodom and Gomorrah. Oh, I should ask. I should say, just a trigger warning: the story of Sodom and Gomorrah involves sexual violence. So, if that's something for you, you might want to skip ahead a little bit and take care of yourself. But these two men come into the city of Sodom. In that culture, the way you traveled from city to city, there weren't Holiday Inn Expresses, right? So when
Right.
you showed up in a city, it was the expectation that multiple people would, when they saw you, they'd be like, "Oh, hey, come over to my house." You'd stay at their house. They would feed you. Then you'd go to the next city and you sort of make your way along. That's how people were able to travel. So these two men come into the city. Nobody invites them in. And it's sort of scandalous. That we would miss the scandal in our modern culture, but it would be scandalous to the people who originally heard it. So then this guy, Lot, comes up and says, "Hey, it's getting dark. Come to my house." Takes them to the house, feeds them. And then it says, all of the men, all of the men of the city come outside of Lot's door, bang on his door, and say, "Put these men outside so that we can have sex with them." And Lot says no. Lot does something equally horrible in that he offers his daughter to them. The men who are actually angels in disguise stop that from happening. But let's just be clear: what is being proposed by the men outside of Lot's house is gang rape. Okay, that is
Mhm.
not homosexuality. Okay,
Right. That's
it's just
power.
that's not. That's something totally different. That is
Mhm.
sexual violence, and that's not
Mhm.
that's not people meeting and falling in love and having a good time. None of that. None of that. So
That, yeah.
then, so then you move into Leviticus. There's two verses in Leviticus, and the verb in those verses is called malakoi. I want to say I've got that right, but you can watch my verse by verse video. But basically, it's not talking about intimacy. Um, it's talking about possibly sexual acts in worship, which would make sense in the book of Leviticus because it's a book
Ooh.
instructing priests about worship. It's also possible that it's just like sex addiction, like sex without
Mhm.
any boundaries. Um, but um, but it is that's what the verb is that's being used there, and so then you go into Romans. So that's it. That's like you've got that story in Genesis. You've got Leviticus. That's all in the Old Testament. You skip over all the things that Jesus said. You skip the book of Acts, and then there's this chapter in Romans. It says, in the first chapter of Romans, it says men gave up natural relations with for unnatural ones and had sex with men, and women did the same thing, had sex with women, and here you start getting into this cultural piece, right? Because what it says is they gave up their natural inclinations, right? So in that culture, there was not a concept of homosexuality, and this is a sort of bigger
Hmm.
piece. Like that idea is a much more modern concept that people will fall in love and will, partner and do that whole thing. In that culture, that did not exist. That concept was not there. And so it was just men and women. Now, men every once in a while engaged in in sexual relationships with each other. For sure, we've got lots of records of that. But the idea of homosexuality, as we conceive of it as an orientation, is not present there. Now, if you take then, we know, in the words of the most holy Lady Gaga, blessed be she, like queer people are born that way, right? From the very beginning. Um, and they might be attracted to the same gender. They might be attracted to all of the genders. Um,
Mhm.
but that's their natural orientation, right? That's what you talk to a gay man, he's going to tell you like, no, my natural attraction is to men,
Right. I've
right?
always been attracted to men. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Always been attracted to men.
Mm-hmm.
A bi person will say, I've always been attracted to men and women, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, so then when you go back to Romans and you read it, it says the men gave up their natural inclinations for unnatural ones. Well, when you sort of bring that into this modern understanding, well, that means that like gay people, their natural if their natural inclination is towards the same gender, then it would be a sin for them to not do that, but to engage in relationships with somebody of the opposite gender, because they're violating who they are, right?
Right. Right.
So that's the book of Romans. And then there's two more in Timothy and Corinthians where it's like a list of sins.
Yeah.
And this is important because if you go to an accurate translation, the most accurate as far as biblical scholars are concerned is the New Revised Standard Updated Edition. You won't see the word homosexuality in these lists. They will. They're. It's called. I want to say. Anyway, it's something else, not homosexuality, because it's like indecent acts or something like that, but a little bit more extreme. And what happened is like when the earlier translators were translating, they read their own definition of what men engaging in illicit acts would be, and they put homosexuality in there. Now, it is interesting that one of those in 1 Timothy, the first place, so when the first time homosexuality appears in the scripture, in an English translation, because it's actually a pretty new word.
That's what I thought. It wasn't known.
Yeah,
in the beginning.
Right. It's not a word that was used, but the first time it appears, it's really interesting. We have a record of that translation committee, right? They keep all their documentations in the 1940s, and when that appeared, there's one of the like assistants sent a note to one of the translators and said, "Hey, I think this is the wrong word." And the translator said, "Actually, yeah, it's the wrong word. We need to fix that," and it didn't. So this guy went back and tried to say, okay, what was in that Timothy passage? When you go back in time, you look at the translations that happened before that one, right? You look in German, you look in French, look at what Martin Luther did, all that kind of stuff. There is a consistent term across these different languages, and it's a term for adults having sex with children, right? And so, which it shouldn't have to be said, but homosexuality is not pedophilia. Just not.
Correct.
It's not the same thing.
I was raised to believe that was true. Woo,
yes,
and I never knew that to be true.
Right. And the perpetuation of that lie, oh my gosh, it's
right.
Yeah. And that's it. That's all the verses. And I don't know, what did that take? 10 minutes? 15 minutes? But you want to talk about like how many verses it talks about in the Bible about being kind to immigrants and foreigners. There's a lot more of that. Mm-hmm. You want to talk about
even loving, about your mind, even when how much it mentions in there about your mind.
Yep. Or how about taking care of the poor and the needy? Like,
yes,
how there's so many laws. There's so much about like when somebody is hungry, how the culture, how the government, how the church is required to function so that those people are not homeless. Those people have food and all their basic needs met, right? There's so much more in the Bible about that than about anything that could possibly be homosexuality. Yeah, you're getting me on my soapbox. I'm sorry.
No, I'm right there with you, 100%. And yet we focus on that, and and I'll be honest. In the years that I was in church, and I was even told don't even hang out with gay people, and I'm like,
right.
It never sat well with me ever.
Yeah.
And and I just I always ended up having friends anyway that were gay
Yeah.
and just figured, oh, well. And then as I stepped away from the church, it's like, I've had the most wonderful people in my life,
Yeah.
and some of them are gay, and they have
That's
been
right.
wonderful and have enriched my life, and I would have missed out on that. And
Yeah.
they don't have to answer to me about what they're doing in their life. I am
Right.
not God. I'm not Holy Ghost Jr. You don't have to
Right.
answer to me. But we just miss out so much on that. And this thing of turning against them and growing up, I can remember sitting around the table and listening to my parents and talk to their friends about, oh, the gays want to get into the schools and they want to be
Oh my
teachers.
gosh.
You know why? Because they want to convert the kids. And I thought,
That's just, oh,
as young as I was, I thought that sounds. I didn't say anything,
right.
but I thought that sounded so bizarre to me. How do you convert someone?
Right. And I can tell you, as a person who's part of the queer community, that sort of toxic masculinity, it's sort of it's called, we will talk about internalized homophobia, and
Yeah.
this idea that, like, because you're supposed to be butch and masculine, whatever, there's this constant editing of yourself, so that you, like, if you, oh gosh, that sounded gay, that did not sound masculine, I need to deepen my voice, I need
Yes.
to whatever, or like, oh gosh, I was standing in this weird way, right? Or like, I was looking at that person of the same gender, and like, oh my gosh, I need to stop staring at them, I need to start staring at these other people. And like, there is this just like,
Oh, that's awful.
that for kids, for
Mm-hmm.
for boys and girls, that kind of that toxic masculinity and heteronormative, when there's this heteronormative expectation that is wrapped in this toxic masculinity, I mean, it's deeply damaging, and and then living for a lot of basically, like, what you were taught is that, like, oh, that's a temptation, right? You are being tempted towards this sin, and your whole life you are internalizing, oh my gosh, this is that I'm just a horrible person, I can't let go of this
Yes.
temptation, whatever. And and you are pretending to be this person that you're not, but you're not just pretending. So there's, it's interesting for people who are not, did not grow up in that stream of Christianity. There is a sense of being in the closet, that is really difficult. But in these very conservative Christian streams, when you are growing up in that as a queer person, it's not just trying to hide that from other people, trying to pretend with other people that you are a butch masculine guy,
You're trying to
um,
convince yourself.
trying to pretend to yourself as well,
Yeah.
because you're told that's not who you are. That's not. It can't possibly be who you are. So you need to be who you really are, which is this, guy who lifts weights and plays football.